I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States
the office of President of the United States.
The erosion of our confidence in the future is threatening to destroy the social and the political fabric of America.
Nothing that I do is sacrificial. It adds an interesting dimension to my life.
You know, I've had a wonderful life. I've had thousands of friends, and I've had an exciting and adventurous and gratifying existence.
Well, he once called that building right there home for 4 years, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, the White House. And tonight, the flag there, the American flag, center of your screen, if you can just see it there over the bright lights above the dark roof. Washington Monument in the background, the flag above the White House at half-staff in honor of Jimmy Carter, the former president's family, announcing this evening Carter's passing at 100 years old, more than a year after entering hospice care at his home in Georgia. It was a remarkable journey for a former peanut farmer from the South, who eventually became an American legend. From the town of Plains, Georgia, to the United States Naval Academy, to a stint in farming before politics came calling. A Georgia state senator became the Peach State's governor, a man who had even bigger ambitions than that. The Democratic nominee for president in 1976, James Earl Carter Jr., won the popular vote and 297 Electoral College votes to become the 39th president of these United States. Hello, good evening. Thanks for staying with us for our continuing coverage here on NewsNation on the death of Jimmy Carter. I'm Blake Berman, live in Washington with the NewsNation special report. Over the next hour plus or so, we are going to be bringing you all the latest reaction to President Carter's passing, a look into his rise to the Oval Office, what came before him during his time as president, and the historic legacy he crafted once he left the nation's top post. Thoughts and reflections from those who knew him and worked with him as well, including President Biden, who spoke just a little less than an hour ago, the President of the United States.
And that's because Jimmy Carter lived a life measured not by words, but by his deeds. Just look at his life's work. He worked to eradicate disease, not just at home, but around the world. He forged peace, advanced civil rights, human rights, promoted free and fair elections around the world. He built housing for the homeless with his own hands. And his compassion and moral clarity lifted people up and changed lives and saved lives all over the globe.
President Biden from St. Croix about half an hour ago. Our NewsNation team standing by. Leland Vittert going to be joining me here in a moment. Kelly Meyer, Libby Dean as well. But first, we begin tonight with our Elizabeth Pran live in Georgia outside the Carter Center. Elizabeth, you live in that area. You live down the road. I hear folks are showing up tonight to the Carter Center to mourn and to honor the 39th president of the United States. What are you seeing there?
You're so, I mean, Blake, he's synonymous with the state of Georgia, right? I mean, we've been here for hours. We've seen just as many members of the community as we have members of the media to pay their respect, whether it be laying a candle or laying flowers. Because we put so much emphasis on just this unbelievable career, whether it be the Navy or the Georgia State Senate or his time in the governor's office here to his epic rise, as you mentioned, to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But when you're here at the Carter Center, there's really so much focus on the man and what he is doing today. Still, his legacy is alive. And we've been to the Carter Center a number of times since his wife of 77 years passed, Rosalind, as you remember, back in 2023. And we walked through the Carter Center and we learned about the work that is still going on today. There are thousands of employees. They are still working to eradicate a number of horrible viruses that we're not even familiar with here in the United States, whether it be river blindness or Guinea disease. There are so many things that we don't face here that these members of the community here are advocating for. And remember, he lived in Plains. We're all familiar with that. It's about 90 miles from here. He would come up every 3 weeks to 4 weeks up into his 90s, up until he was almost immobile. And he would come, he would meet with members of the center all day, pull down a Murphy bed out on the wall and sleep here so he could get back to work on the next morning. So I spoke with the Vice President of Operations, and he's going to be making calls throughout the night. His name is Craig Withers, and he spoke a little bit about how they're motivated now more than ever to continue the legacy. Here he is.
That will be his legacy. The Carter Center is not going to go away. We will continue to serve the people around the world who would benefit and don't receive the kind of services that they deserve.
And Blake, we have spent some time with his grandson, Jason. As you know, he's survived by 4 children, 11 grandchildren, 14 great-grandchildren. And what Jason really wants him to be remembered for is the fact that he was just a doting grandfather, that he loved going fishing with him and spending time with him in Plains, Georgia. Of course, we all hear the anecdotal stories of him walking around with Rosalind, exercising in Plains, Georgia, just going back to his hometown with his bride, who he met, obviously, when they were very, very young and spent those 77 years together. So very romantic story. So here in Georgia, Blake, really just a ton of emotion, right? As I mentioned, he is synonymous with the Peach State. Blake?
The Carter Center putting out a statement today, Elizabeth. In lieu of flowers, President Carter requested that those wishing to honor his memory do so through contributions to the Carter Center and acts of service to humanity. Do we have a sense, Elizabeth, of sort of what the next, I don't know, 3, 5, 7 days could look like?
Well, it's going to be a media onslaught, right? Because he does want his final resting place to be next to his bride. That's going to be in Plains, Georgia. So we know that there's going to be services and ceremonies there. We know that he will spend time here at the Carter Center. It's a little bit tricky, right? Because now is a Sunday. Usually the center is quite quiet on a Sunday. And then the week ahead, we do face the fact that we're facing a holiday, right? A lot of logistics. We have spoken to members on the ground that are asking for us to be patient because people are going to be coming from across the globe to cover the story because he impacted people across the globe. But as I mentioned, he will be spending time here laying in repose. We're going to get a timeline of when he'll be traveling here, when he'll be in D.C. Of course, they will tell us. They're notifying us as soon as those details are made public. Blake.
Elizabeth Pran, live for us tonight outside the Carter Center there in Georgia. Elizabeth, thank you. Appreciate it. Leland Vittert, host of On Balance, joins me live now here with our special report coverage here on NewsNation. Leland, I think about this. And thanks for being with us. I think about this in so many dimensions. It's remarkable he lived to 100. It's remarkable what he did post-presidency. That all across this country and really all across the world, it's also the most exclusive club, you could argue, in this country is those who served as the President of the United States. And that's how I view sort of this moment and this evening with Jimmy Carter, the personal and the political.
Yeah, that is actually the point that Donald Trump made in his statement, Blake, about Jimmy Carter, is that he had too served in that very small group of men. And that club you talked about is unique not just to the United States, but to the world, right? We're really the only country that has past presidents. The rest of the world doesn't really do that in the same way. And Jimmy Carter decided to use his position, his pulpit, if you will, as a former Sunday school teacher might say, as a past president, not to enrich himself, but to help the world in many different ways, and probably to do many of the things that he wished his presidency had been able to accomplish in one way or another. It seems very fitting and perhaps emblematic that we're talking the most about Jimmy Carter's time after his presidency. And there's a real sort of distinction here between Jimmy Carter, the man, and his time after his presidency, as we watch a video from his time in the White House, and his presidency itself, which obviously had some real difficulties.
There will be a state funeral. He is expected to lie in the Capitol Rotunda. We see this, Leland. They're all unique and different in their own rights when presidents pass and how they are honored. But there's also sort of they sort of go about it in their own distinct but similar ways. And it will be quite the scene here in Washington in the upcoming days when you have the living presidents here in Washington honoring Jimmy Carter, most likely at the National Cathedral.
Really, it's a sort of phenomenal tradition in America. And then just after that is the inauguration. Once again, a tradition where past presidents come together. This I thought was interesting from Donald Trump. While I strongly disagreed with him philosophically and politically, I realized that he truly loved and respected our country and all it stands for. He was truly a good man and, of course, will be greatly missed. He was also very consequential, far more than most presidents after he left the Oval Office. There is this moment, Blake, right, where the country comes together to honor the man, but also to honor the office that I think is really poignant and, again, unique in the world. And when America does things really well, it's worth pointing them out how unique and exceptional America is in that sense. That for a little while we all stopped talking politics and remember somebody who came to Washington to serve. And I think if there's a memory of Jimmy Carter, it's the peanut farmer who became the president. No one really remembers him as president.
Well, you know, I think obviously folks our age, Leland, we remember Jimmy Carter after the presidency, right? And the generation older than us remembers Jimmy Carter potentially from his time in the Oval Office. You know, just you and I speaking here, you know, his time post-presidency, I remember him as the the former president who would come to town and help build homes for Habitat for Humanity, right? And that was part of the legacy that he left behind.
I think it's a great point in terms of what he did after office. There's a different part of his presidency, right? And it was marked with high inflation. It was the Iranian hostage crisis. He was a one-term president for a reason. Obviously, the Israeli-Egyptian peace accord is something that lives on and is really the sort of capstone of his foreign policy. So there's that part. I would offer a different part of his presidential legacy, which is if you think about sort of the horror that was visited upon the country by Richard Nixon. And the assault on our all collective sense of decency as Americans. And then Gerald Ford pardoning Nixon and signing the end of his political career when signing that pardon. And then Jimmy Carter was sort of what America needed, right? He was this everyman peanut farmer, former governor from Georgia, sort of a nobody who carried his own briefcase, who redefined the presidency and sort of reset America in a certain way, and then brought Ronald Reagan. And without Jimmy Carter, there was no Ronald Reagan. Without restoring decency to the Oval Office in the way that Jimmy Carter did, that probably sort of opened the door for this incredible moment in American history as it happened. You and I don't remember the Carter administration. I think you're right to point out those that do and live through it have some really hard memories of that time.
Stagflation, you know, rising prices. Obviously, you went over Iran. There were a host of issues that went before Jimmy Carter within the Oval Office that led to him as a one-term president. But again, as you and I have discussed, then there was also the after the White House extensive chapter that many folks remember him for as well. Leland Vittert, host of On Balance. Got to leave it there, buddy. Thank you very much for jumping on tonight. Appreciate you.
All the best.
You as well. Chris Stirewalt, NewsNation political editor, host of The Hill Sunday with Chris Stirewalt, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, on the phone with me now. Chris, always nice to speak with you. Unfortunately, under these terms, but a life incredibly well lived by Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, I don't know what else a man could want, but 100 years, married to his wife for 55 years or whatever.
Yeah, more than 70.
More than 70.
Yeah.
I'd say he hit a pretty good lick. That was pretty good. The first U.S. president born in a hospital, a man who bridged the gap between an old America, a segregated America, a pre-World War II America, and a modern America. He was definitely a transitional figure in many ways. And as I was listening to you and Leland talk, I was thinking about Jimmy Carter, the nuclear engineer, and his love of technology and his love of trying to fix things. And where Jimmy Carter went awry in his presidency was that he brought an engineer's kind of approach to things. He may have been something like Herbert Hoover, another technocratic one-termer who had a lot of big ideas about how to fix things. But, you know, Jimmy Carter was a guy who was on the team that put the first nuclear submarine in the water, and he kept that same spirit. I believe it's true that Jimmy Carter had hot water, solar heated hot water panels installed on the roof of the White House.
He did, yeah.
And he was that kind of a person, is that he brought an engineer sensibility to the presidency, an office that is maybe better suited for other gifts, but those gifts served him well elsewhere in his life.
We've, you know, Chris, I don't know if you heard me say this, but I sort of view this in two lanes, the personal and the political. And on a day like today, obviously, more so the personal. But on the political, there are a lot of comparisons, some might say, to the current president, who we just heard from about 45 minutes ago. President Biden saying he learned from Jimmy Carter to, quote, never give up. And in a rare, sort of a rare moment where President Biden took questions from reporters, he talked about the, quote unquote, decency of Jimmy Carter. Everybody deserves a shot, Joe Biden says. I wonder what you think of as we look at pictures of those two, a President Carter and a then Senator Biden, the link between those two as you see it.
Well, no, I believe Joe Biden was the first U.S. senator to endorse Jimmy Carter for president in 1976. And the idea was, behind Jimmy Carter's candidacy, was we need to do something else, because the Democratic Party's establishment had been so shattered by Vietnam, right? Lyndon Johnson and Hubert Humphrey had been so shattered, and the party had been so broken by Vietnam that they were at a loss. And Jimmy Carter did something remarkable. He put together a coalition that included a new piece of the Democratic Party, a post-1965 piece of the Democratic Party, a lot of black voters. But he brought back in a lot of moderate to conservative Southerners and people of the traditional Democratic coalition in the Midwest and in some places in the Northeast. And I think if we think about, as we think about Jimmy Carter, we can think about Jimmy Carter, the engineer, but we can also think about Jimmy Carter was the first president to describe himself as a born-again Christian. He was the first president who was part of a great awakening, a religious revival that swept across the country in the 1970s and into the 1980s that was brought about in the wake of all the turmoil that had racked the nation. And whatever anybody thought about Jimmy Carter, he was taken seriously and seen sincerely as a Christian and a person of faith and a person who was true to his ideals. He wrestled very publicly on the question of abortion. He wrestled even publicly post-presidency on the question of gay marriage. He was deliberate and sincere about his faith, and I think that that gave him greater standing in the minds of more moderate voters who might otherwise not have gone with a liberal Democrat.
Chris, let me leave you with this. It is a very interesting time in this town right now. You have a sitting president with only 22 days left in office, which means you have the president-elect from a different party coming in 22 days. Republicans are about to have full control. And there's a lot moving on in this town. And now there will be, and rightfully so, a moment, many moments to honor Jimmy Carter. And I wonder what you think Washington will be like over the next week to two during all of this playing out.
Well, it's going to be a zoo, and that's for sure. And all of the fancy people will be here, and all of that stuff will happen. But the message that everybody attending all of these events ought to remember that's relevant for now. In 1976, it would have been really hard for any party or any politician to have been riding higher than Jimmy Carter. It was really, really good. And the Republicans had been totally repudiated, bad midterm followed by bad quadrennial, and the Democrats said they had a mandate and they went hard. and by 1980, it was all gone. So the James Carville's line applies. You're never as far down as you think you are, but that also means you're never as far up as you think you are either. These mandates, these moments are ephemeral, and how you do at them, how you do in the moment matters a lot more than what happened in the election that's over.
Chris Stirewalt, host of The Hill Sunday, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Thank you for calling in, Chris. I appreciate you as always, sir. Thank you.
Heck yeah, my friend.
You got it. All right. Still ahead here on this News Nation special report, what big names in the Republican Party, including President-elect Trump, are saying about Jimmy Carter's passing. Plus, one of Jimmy Carter's closest advisors, both in his campaign and in the White House, joins me live here in Washington. What was it like inside the Oval with Jimmy Carter? He'll tell us. But first, did you know that Jimmy Carter's father ran a grocery store and a peanut farm in Plains, Georgia? After he ended his service in the Navy, he returned to Plains, took over the business, expanded it. At the same time, he also started becoming involved in local politics. He was first elected to the state Senate in 1962. We're back in a few.
I've just been talking about forces of potential destruction that mankind has developed and how we might control them. It's equally important that we remember the beneficial forces that we have evolved over the ages and how to hold fast to them. One of those constructive forces is the enhancement of individual human freedoms through the strengthening of democracy and the fight against deprivation, torture, terrorism, and the persecution of people throughout the world. The struggle for human rights overrides all differences of color or nation or language. Those who hunger for freedom, who thirst for human dignity, and who suffer for the sake of justice, they are the patriots of this cause.
January 1981, Jimmy Carter from the White House there in his farewell address. Now, whether you agreed with his policies or not, left, right, center, whatever, the country comes together to pay their respects for a man who lived to 100 years old, the 39th president of the United States, started as a peanut farmer in Georgia, made his way into local politics, the governor of Georgia, then eventually the 39th president of the United States. And in the upcoming days, we will see both in and out of Washington, the country pay their respects to Jimmy Carter. Our Libby Dean joins us in a moment with how Donald Trump is reacting tonight. But first to our Kelly Meyer with what President Biden said and what we're maybe or maybe not learning, Kelly, so far about how all of this could play out in the upcoming week or so.
Yeah, absolutely. We know in his statement tonight, even earlier, that he ordered that official state funeral to happen. Although, as you mentioned, the Carter Center in their statement earlier, they are just getting this underway as far as public events. That all is still pending. And as you mentioned, the donations going to the Carter Center. But for President Biden, he's not here in Washington at the moment, but he did feel it necessary and moved even to go and give remarks in front of the cameras. As you said, how he took questions from reporters as well and talked about the decency of former President Carter. He also talked about their friendship. And as Chris Stirewalt noted, he was the first then senator, first member of Congress to endorse his presidential campaign. We know that he returned the favor in 2020 for President Biden. He said that he called him the most effective supporter in the Senate for him, his first and most effective supporter. And he said, my loyal and dedicated friend is what Carter called Biden in 2020. So they have this friendship that goes back and forth for decades. So it was really notable that he came out in front of those cameras on vacation in St. Croix tonight to deliver remarks about someone who he said he admired and also called a friend. I want to play a bit of what he had to say. I'm not sure if we have that soundbite there, but he basically said that's because Jimmy Carter lived a life measured not by his words, but by his deeds. Just look at his life, life's work to eradicate disease at home, around the world. He forged peace, advanced civil rights, human rights, promoted free and fair elections. He built housing for the homeless, moral clarity, lifted people up all over the globe, talked all about that. And he also mentioned he said what his post-presidency signifies. And he said, never give up hope, which is something that we noticed as we covered Biden on the campaign trail, is something that he also kind of reflected and put towards in his own campaign. Now, you mentioned too, Blake, that the flag, as you mentioned coming into the show, at half staff here at the White House as well as on Capitol Hill, and those will stay at half staff for the next 30 days because this is a former president that has passed away. So that will go into the new presidency, which is interesting to note as well, Blake.
Kelly Meyer, live for us at the White House this evening. Kelly, thank you. Our Libby Dean covers Donald Trump in and out. The president-elect will become the 47th president of the United States in just 22 days. And tonight, he is responding to the passing of Jimmy Carter. Libby joins us live. Libby, it was a fascinating statement that he put out, acknowledging the moment, the person, and the rare club that they were all a part of.
Blake, not just one statement, we actually got two from the incoming president about this former president, Jimmy Carter's passing today. Trump was actually pretty quick to react, posting on social media about it. As you said, talking about that exclusive club that is being president, and it is an exclusive club. Trump's going to be the 47th. That is something that is a big feat for these presidents, and that is why Trump is highlighting it in this statement. He actually said here that the challenges that Jimmy faced as president came at a pivotal time for our country, and he did everything in his power to improve the lives of all Americans. For that, we all owe him a great debt of gratitude. Now, in that second statement, actually, Blake, what was interesting, Trump highlighted actually the differences that he has with, of course, this former Democratic president, Trump being a Republican. And Trump said, while I strongly disagreed with him philosophically and politically, I also realized that he truly loved and respected our country and all it stands for, going on to say he was a truly good man and, of course, will be greatly missed. Now, as you mentioned, Blake, covering Trump on the campaign trail over the last year and a half here at NewsNation, oddly, Jimmy Carter was something that Trump brought up pretty much every other speech during his campaign, talking about Jimmy Carter's legacy and how Jimmy Carter's legacy is better off now because of Biden's presidency, because Trump calls Biden's presidency, of course, he's repeated it several times, Biden's failed presidency. So he's essentially highlighting here that Carter's legacy that is left now, and also these 100 years of life, is better off and now looks better because of Biden's presidency. But also what's going to play out over the next 22 days until Trump takes office is going to be something to watch, because we've also got this speakership race. We've got, of course, all of the paying respects here to Jimmy Carter's life that is going to be happening not only in Georgia, but here in D.C. So it's going to be a jam-packed month of January. It already was. And now, of course, we want to respect Jimmy Carter's life, and everyone going to pay their respects in the coming days. Blake?
Libby Dean, live for us here in Washington. Libby, thank you. All right, still to come here on our NewsNation special report, how one of Jimmy Carter's closest advisors tells me he wants Carter to be remembered. And, by the way, Jimmy Carter, a music lover of all types, especially rock and roll. He became friends with Greg Allman. The Allman Brothers did concerts for him, in fact. And during Willie Nelson's Georgia concerts, by the way, Carter sometimes would take the stage, pretending to play the harmonica. In his last years, he was known to still listen to music. Several top musicians visited the White House while Jimmy Carter was the 39th president of the United States. Our coverage continues here on NewsNation.
America was not built on timidity or panic or uncertainty about the future or a lack of confidence in our own technology or our own will or ability. America was built with vision, with faith, and also with hard work.
Welcome back here to our continuing coverage on NewsNation. This special report on the passing of Jimmy Carter. The Carter Center saying today, earlier this evening, that Carter passed away at the age of 100. The 39th president passing away about a year after he was in hospice care in his home state of Georgia. Jimmy Carter, the president, of course, for 4 years. And during that time, one of his closest advisors was Stuart Eizenstat. He was basically the domestic policy advisor for Jimmy Carter in the White House. And as history looks back on Jimmy Carter, of course, one of the critiques and criticisms, really, or at least direct acknowledgments of the former president was he was a one-term president, right? Every president wants to be a two-term president, get another shot at it, expand the agenda, expand the policies. I talked to Stuart Eisenstadt recently about his former boss and that idea of only being a one-term president. And his top advisor said the following to me about how he views Carter in a little bit of a different way. Watch.
Because of his massive loss in 1980 to Ronald Reagan, somehow his presidency was viewed as a failure. He was the most impactful one-term president we've had in the modern era. The energy security which we enjoy as a country today, the lack of dependence on OPEC oil, which he inherited, rests on the foundation of three major energy bills that he passed, which deregulated natural gas and crude oil prices, leading to more production, put conservation at the center of his energy program, including putting a solar panel on the White House. Well, on the foreign policy scene, he's given great credit, as he should, for the Camp David Accords and the Egypt Peace Treaty, the first that that Israel had with its Arab neighbors. He's given great credit for the SALT Treaty, reducing nuclear arms with the Soviet Union. He's given great credit for the Panama Canal Treaty, for putting human rights at the center of his foreign policy. What he's not been given credit for is the following. All of the defense programs that Ronald Reagan put into effect, the cruise missile, the stealth bomber, intermediate nuclear forces in Europe, all of these came as a result of initiatives that President Carter started. And when the Afghan invasion came through the Soviet Union, he's not sufficiently recognized for the really tough position he took, which was admired even by conservatives. The grain embargo, increasing defense spending even more.
And lastly, there are, of course, the post-presidency years, the Carter Center.
So he is
Jimmy Carter as a fighter, how he's known. How do you view the post-presidential years?
His post-presidency is extraordinary. He monitored over 100 Democratic elections. He helped cure, along with the pharmaceutical industry, two major African diseases, guinea worm and river blindness. This was a life well lived, a full and complete life, not just in longevity, but in its impact from the time he got into public life and served as a submariner to the time he passed away.
Still to come here on our special report on NewsNation. It was a passion project for him, even at the very end of his life, in his later years. The CEO of Habitat for Humanity joining us live right after the break with the impact that Jimmy Carter and his wife left there. But before that, did you know that Jimmy Carter survived numerous health scares? In 2015, he survived metastatic melanoma. 2019, he suffered several falls, including breaking his hip, had a procedure to relieve pressure on his brain caused by bleeding from several of those falls. And when he entered hospice in February 2023, his family was told to expect him only to survive a few days. Instead, James Earl Carter Jr. lived for almost 2 more years. Our coverage continues.
The struggle for human rights overrides all differences of color or nation or language. Those who hunger for freedom, who thirst for human dignity, and who suffer for the sake of justice, they are the patriots of this cause.
So many different ways to think about Jimmy Carter, but for many, they think of the man after the presidency, the one who built houses by hand and loved serving others. The former president's legacy includes his deep and lasting connection with Habitat for Humanity. For over 35 years, the former president and his late wife, the former First Lady Rosalind Carter, worked alongside volunteers to build homes for those in need. In the process, They became symbols of hope and compassion. Their involvement in the organization helped to shape it into the global force that it is today. And joining us live here on News Nation is Jonathan Reckford, the CEO of Habitat for Humanity International. Jonathan, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it. Obviously, a sad moment, a sad day for you and your organization and so many around you. But as you reflect on Jimmy Carter, a man you knew, what comes to your mind?
It is a sad day, but also a chance to celebrate in a remarkable life. And President Carter had such an impact on me. He was a friend and a hero. His personal example inspired millions around the world. And one of the great privileges of my life was to spend a week every year, along with occasional other visits, building somewhere in the world. And wherever he went, that brought attention to the need for safe, decent, affordable housing, but also inspired so many others to get involved. And most people, if you say Habitat for Humanity, the first thing they'll say is Jimmy Carter. And it's actually not true that President Carter both started and ran Habitat for Humanity. But what is true is when he and Mrs. Carter got involved in 1984 and slept in a church basement and helped rehab a tenement building on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, that's when the world found out about Habitat.
March of 1984, as you mentioned, was when they got involved. They worked with nearly 103,000 volunteers in 14 countries to build, renovate, and repair. You have the exact number here, 4,331 homes.
It's extraordinary. And as amazing as those numbers are, that really only scratches the surface of their impact, because it was a tiny organization when they got involved. And since they've gotten involved, we've helped almost 62 million people have new or improved housing.
Why did they get involved? Why do you think they decided to get involved at the time?
You know, President Carter has told me over and over that actually Habitat for Humanity for them was the best way he knew to put their Christian faith into action in a very practical and tangible way. And they first got involved because Habitat was right next door. Americus Georgia's is right next to Plains. And Habitat volunteers and staff were coming to church at their church at Maranatha, and he got to know them. And then it all really changed when he was up in New York for a UN conference, went running and actually ran by a Habitat site and made the comment that we need to come and help these young people with the build. And the founder, Millard Fuller, heard about that, immediately jumped in, and that fall of 1984, the Carters rode up in a bus with a group of volunteers from Plains, and that's really when the world found out about Habitat. No one had ever seen a former president of the United States behave that way, and I think it was so consistent with his faith. He would also say that consistently that the chance to serve and see the impact he was having on families that he was building with, always he felt he got more out of it than anything he was able to give. We might respectfully differ because he gave an awful lot, but I think it's that feeling of community and feeling of impact. Also, he was a very skilled carpenter and actually loved it. So for him, it was both enjoyable, but I think the deep part of it was seeing the transformation it had on families.
One volunteer nicknamed him Benevolent Taskmaster. Do you know the origination of that story?
You know, I've heard similar things. Okay. Which famous volunteer, but you know, people always consider it a huge honor to be on the Carter House. Often there'd be 100 or more houses being built at a time. And I always warn them, it is an honor, but also it comes with very high expectation, because President Carter would always say, look, don't ask for a photo. If you're asking for a photo, you're not working, I'm not working, and the person with the camera is not working. And you didn't want to get caught, as I would say, getting that blue-eyed submarine commander glare if you didn't think you were working hard enough. And we would always say it's not a competition as long as the Carter gets finished first. But he took the building very seriously and cared deeply that it was done well and that we were creating really high-quality homes for these families purchasing the homes.
Jimmy and Rosalind Carter getting involved with Habitat for Humanity in March of 1984, some 40 years ago. And as we are about to turn the calendar to 2025, the lasting impact is still there. Jonathan Reckford, CEO, Habitat for Humanity. Thanks for being with us tonight. Appreciate your time, sir. And best of luck with the organization going forward. You got it.
Thank you.
All right, still ahead here. He credits his life's achievements to the woman by his side for more than 7 decades. A look at Jimmy Carter's true love, including a letter that he wrote to himself on the other side of the break.
I've said many times, very truthfully, the best thing ever had happened in my life was when she said she would marry me, and did.
You can see the smile there. Jimmy Carter talking about his wife of 77 years, Rosalind Carter. A 7 decades-long love story from small-town sweethearts all the way to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue as the President of the United States and First Lady. Rosalind Carter passed away in November of 2023 at the age of 96. Jimmy Carter called her his equal partner in everything he accomplished. Their daughter, Amy Carter, shared a letter that President Carter wrote Rosalind while he was serving in the Navy.
My darling, every time I have ever been away from you, I have been thrilled when I returned to discover just how wonderful you are. While I am away, I try to convince myself that you really are not, could not be, as sweet and beautiful as I remember. But when I see you, I fall in love with you all over again. Does that seem strange to you? It doesn't to me. Goodbye, darling. Until tomorrow, Jimmy.
77 years of marriage from public housing to the White House and many more remarkable moments in between and beyond. President Carter will now be buried next to his wife, the ending of a love story for all to admire. Our special coverage continues here on NewsNation after the break. Bill O'Reilly joins us here on Jimmy Carter's passing and more reaction and what we can expect for his memorial service. Will all the living presidents be together again here in Washington in just a matter of days? Our coverage continues. Stay with us.
Hey, thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your screen. And don't forget, click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.